The Meaning of Life, an excerpt from the book The Life and Teaching of Leo Tolstoy, a book of extracts, published in 1904. I used to think it impossible to show people their mistake and sin without hurting them. Is it possible to pull out a tooth without giving pain? Yes, cocaine and chloroform can allay physical suffering, but there is nothing of the kind for the soul. Thus I thought, but then immediately said to myself, no, there is a spiritual chloroform. Here, as in other things, the body has been studied thoroughly, but the soul has not yet been considered. The operation of cutting off a leg or an arm is done with chloroform, whereas the operation of mending a man's soul is done without, and it hurts. That is why it often does not cure, but only causes a worse illness, that of ill will. And yet there is a spiritual chloroform, and it is well known. It is always love. And that is not all. It is possible to perform a physical operation satisfactorily without chloroform, but the soul is extremely sensitive, and so every operation performed without the anesthetic of love must always be disastrous. It is easy to learn whether there is much iron in the sun and what other metals there are in the sun and the stars. But it is hard, yes, frightfully hard, to discover that which convicts us of immorality. Not to see the promised land towards which one has led others, or contributed ever so little to leading others. This is the unchangeable law of true life. The more genuine the work of true life, the more remote are its results. And not only remote, but endless are its consequences. Therefore, we cannot see them. We can foresee more than our generation will witness. A house that is being built we may see, and we may reach the rank of general, but we shall not witness liberation from state slavery, nor even from land slavery. This is the most evident proof that life consists not in the realization of an aim, but in the fulfillment of an embassy. You will ask, in what does the work accomplished by the life of the universe consist? To this I will answer that we cannot know it all, but can always know when we contribute towards and when we oppose it. Loving relations towards all that lives, first of all, of course, towards men, the nearest of them. The experience of this feeling and of its stimulation in others is an indication of one's participation in the common work. The experience of the feeling of enmity, hatred, and of its stimulation in others is an indication of opposition to the common work. We cannot know God's object if it were for this reason only, that it is infinite. But we do know and can always know whether we are fulfilling His will, that for which we are living, which He desires of us. He holds us, as it were, with reins, and we, like horses, do not know whither we are going, nor wherefore. But we do know, through pain, when we are going whither we ought not, and by a sense of freedom, absence of restraint, when we are going where we should. His will is, in the first place, that we should pay in good works the rent of the life given us. Good works are those which increase love in men, and the work is to augment, cultivate that talent, our soul, which is also given us. And one cannot do one without the other. One cannot do good works which increase love without augmenting one's talent, one's soul, without increasing love in it. And one cannot augment one's talent, increase love in one's soul, without doing good to men, increasing love in them. We all think that our duty, our calling, is to fulfill various works, to educate our children, accumulate a fortune, write a book, discover a law of science. But one thing only is necessary, that life should be a complete, good, rational work. A work not in the eyes of men, leaving behind it the memory of a good life, but a work before God, to present to Him oneself, one's soul, better than it was, nearer to Him, more submissive to Him, more in conformity. To think thus, above all, to feel thus, is very difficult. One keeps turning off into human glory, but it is possible and necessary. Help me, God. Remember that thy life consists only in the fulfillment of the will of God on earth. But to fulfill the will of God is impossible. Thou canst only cultivate thy spiritual essence, and cultivate it thou canst only by maintaining purity in thy animal, humility in thy human, and love in thy divine life. For the maintenance of purity, privations are necessary. For humility, bad repute and humiliations. For love, the enmity of men towards thee are necessary. And if ye love them that love you, what thanks have ye? And therefore, that which thou callest suffering, that which thou complainest of, which troublest thee, which thou regrettest, art afraid of, all this is nothing else than either privations and pain, or evil repute, insult, humiliation, or enmity of men towards thee. And the one, the other, and the third are necessary to thee for the maintenance of purity, humility, love, for the cultivation of thy spiritual essence, for the service of the kingdom of God, for life. And therefore I should be not grieved by, but glad of privations and humiliations and enmity. The living man is the one who advances towards that which is illuminated by the lamp moving in front of him, and who never reaches the limit of the illuminated space, since it always recedes before him. This is life, and there is no other. That which we disdain, the immediate realization in small things of the truth we know, this alone is necessary. If I were the Tsar's ambassador in Turkey, how I should control myself, watch myself. But being now God's ambassador in the world, I am utterly careless. And yet, a Tsar cannot be aware of all my doings, whereas here it is impossible to conceal anything. I am still thinking of the evil of choosing an external object for one's life. Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his truth, and the rest will be added unto you. Seaman, be guided by the compass which is on thy ship, by the tiny needle which is 1,000 times smaller than the ship, and not by any visible object, not even the stars. All misleads except that which is in thee. I threw a chip into a whirlpool and observed how it spun. A steamer is a similar chip, only a little bigger. The world, a speck. 1,000 years, 1 minute. All is nothing. All that is material is nothing. One thing only is real, unquestionable. The law according to which everything, both small and great, is accomplished. The will of God. My chief work is not merely to fulfill the 5 commandments, not merely to denounce property, avoid sin, etc. All this is not the work. They are only the conditions of the works, complying with which I may be certain that I am realizing my calling. They are the forms of my influence on others. My work itself is to live to impart to the world by all the means in my power the element of reason. That which appears to us as the movement of our personal life is the form our life takes when we place ourselves at an angle with the life of God. But when we place ourselves in the same direction, then this life passes through us, we ourselves remaining stationary. The illusion of personal life disappears, and we are conscious that our life is nothing else than the power of God. But what is this infinite power in its fullness? This is an eternal mystery, and it is not necessary for me to know any more. I know only that in this state death is not fearful. Into thy hands I commend my spirit. The separateness of my spirit, which was produced by the form through which I was passing, ceases, and I unite with the all. I have lately begun to feel this, that when I die, I shall not really die, but shall live in all the rest. In practice, the theory or ideal is never perfectly fulfilled. In other words, man never attains perfection, but only approaches towards it. It is impossible to draw a mathematically straight line. All lines are but approximations to the ideal. Such incomplete fulfillment of the ideal is the inevitable condition of life, and is not sin. Everyone advances towards the ideal according to his powers. But concession or compromise in theory is a great sin. If I, knowing that a straight line is a mathematical conception, try to draw one, I shall attain an approximation to a straight line. But if seeing that it is impossible to draw a perfectly straight line, I decide that I may deviate from the ideal of the straight line, then I stray away God knows where. It's the same with moral principles. The question of utility must be altogether set aside by the Christian. No one can decide questions of utility. Who will be benefited and in what way? Utility is beyond our power. But what we should do for the accomplishment of the Father's will, this we know, and this we must do. What you say about your activity, about the necessity, or rather advantage of making certain compromises, simply in order that you may be able to continue your activity, does not convince me. The most precious thing you possess, and that you are able to possess, is your soul, your spiritual personality. And this is also the most powerful instrument of your influence over others. Therefore, the lowering of your spiritual personality and every conscious compromise is such a lowering cannot, for any purpose, be advantageous. I am so alarmed at those customary pernicious compromises, which deprive life of all its significance, that I challenge this foe everywhere and attack him, especially when I hear considerations as to the apparent utility we attain. There is only one way of serving mankind, that is, to become better yourself.